But I do want to welcome you all to the happy hour and to the coaches panel. Whether or not you're actually enjoying the happy hour portion of it is up to you. I know some of you guys, some people said that they were, getting up bright and early for a run or a ride tomorrow, so they didn't want to partake, but that's not me. So we'll do that. I feel like I know all you guys. Jessica, I think you might be the only name I'm not familiar with. But my name is Scott, and I'm the host of Ordinary Marathoner podcast. Also a triathlon coach for Team Ordinary. And just a couple things to note before we get going here is that our annual charity race starts next Friday. It's called the Ordinary Marathon. If you've, I think most of you guys have registered, but if you haven't registered yet, head on over to ordinarymarathon.com and do that for us. It's a really fun time. It's a 10-day virtual event. You can ask me questions about it if you like. But all the information is pretty much on the website anyway. So check that out. A lot of you guys here, I know from Zwift and from riding together. We do our Thursday night rides on Zwift. I try, if I know you guys and I know you're on Zwift, I'm happy to invite you. So let me know if you want to be invited. We do a lot of fun trivia stuff, and the last couple of weeks have been a lot of fun. And next Thursday, Nick Doe, who's the guy who kind of gives me a lot of crap during the ride, he challenged me to do 1,000 watts in London. So it should be fun. We'll be giving it our all on that ride, and it's a really good time. So anyway, our panel tonight consists of 3 professionals, 2 triathlon coaches. We have Patrick Carey here. We have Laura Stebbins. You can give a little wave, Laura. And our sports dietitian, our official team Ordinary sports dietitian, Allison Knott. You can give a wave there, Allison.
Hi.
And just wanted to go through and let them kind of give, a couple minutes and tell us a little bit about themselves before we get going. So Patrick, why don't I start with you?
Sure. So, I run Speed Science Coaching, and we're based just outside of Lake Placid, New York, and we work with athletes all over the country. I'm a USA Cycling elite level coach, just got that certification, and Ironman certified as well. And so we work primarily one-on-one with athletes full-time, and then we also offer in-person skills training and skills clinics for any type of cycling. And I also do run form coaching in person, and we do bike fitting as well.
Awesome. Thanks for coming, Patrick. Appreciate it. Patrick's also all these guys have been guests on the podcast pretty much recently. I think Laura's been on often, but haven't had her on in probably about a year. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you've been up to, since I haven't had you on the podcast in a while. What have you been up to?
So Laura Stebbins, or Laura Ann on Facebook, if everybody knows me from there. So I am a triathlon coach. I also coach single sport athletes as well. The majority of my athletes are all remote, so we do a lot of our training and workouts and stuff virtually. But I do have some local ones, which is really nice to be able to go and do the one-on-one and go to the races and check it out. I'm a 3-time Ironman, and I like coaching the long course athletes, but I also really like coaching newbie triathletes that are coming in that are just new to the sport and wanting to get their feet wet, because I just think it's such a fun and exciting time. So, yeah.
Awesome. And Allison, you were a recent guest on the podcast as well, our team dietitian. Why don't you give us a little bit of a rundown about yourself, Allison Knott?
Sure. So not a triathlon coach, but I am a sports dietitian. I've been a dietitian now for 12 years, and just in the last 3 years got the board certified specialty in sports nutrition. So that's a great kind of addition to my experience. And I have a practice where I coach what I like to call everyday athletes. So those are just the groups that are really getting in there and being active, whether it's through, some kind of race or just in the gym and trying to, fuel their workouts. I also work in corporate wellness, and I work with a couple of NFL teams on food service operations too. So, kind of varied experience. I have lots of freelance experience with writing and that sort of thing. So, yeah. And I met Scott because we were introduced by a mutual friend who is also a dietitian. And Scott and I kind of worked a little bit together when you were training for the class 2 years ago. Is that right?
Yep.
Wow, I can't believe it's been 2 years.
Advice enough that year. That was my fault. I didn't stay away from the ice cream.
No, stop. I'm really excited to be in this group because that's the only reason that I met you, and yeah, it's really fun. I love it.
No, that's great. I'm going to start with you. So I guess the way we'll do this is ask a couple questions off the bat, and then after that, I'm just going to open it up. Now, we have a list of questions that people have submitted over the last days. We opened up a little bit of a Google page that people submitted some questions. So I have those if we need it. But I'd rather just try to go around and talk to you guys and see if you have any questions. But so I'm going to keep it right here with you. Since this is a happy hour, how am I destroying my training by having my glass of wine? What's the effect of alcohol when it comes to training so I can ruin the happy hour for everyone?
Kill it right off the bat, Scott.
So we can just understand what we're doing and move on.
Kill any buzzes out there. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think when it comes to alcohol, it's definitely about quantity, right? So there's a spectrum of how much people are consuming, and if you are on the lower end of that spectrum, then that's definitely going to be better than being on the opposite end of that spectrum, meaning how much you're actually taking in. So as far as the impact of how it's going to influence your training, that also is going to be dependent on how much you're consuming. So it can be detrimental to muscle repair and recovery. It can also have an impact on your hydration status, of course. So if you're drinking to the point that you are becoming severely dehydrated, then that's going to have a negative impact, which is if it's carrying over into the next day and you have a hangover and you're trying to train with a hangover, you're kind of starting behind because you're starting dehydrated. And so that's going to impact your performance level and how far you can actually push and what your exertion rate is, because all of that has a lot to do with your blood volume, and that's going to shift, which could potentially then lead to your heart racing faster because you're dehydrated, and there are lots of negative impacts that come along with that condition. But that again is going to be that further end of the spectrum. If you're drinking a glass of wine, or maybe even 2 glasses of wine, you're probably just fine. But if you have that carryover effect, then that's going to be a challenge. And there's also that thought of, well, what are you doing if you're doing anything differently because you're drinking? So if you say, my diet changes significantly when I drink alcohol, then there's going to be even more of a cascading effect. Or if it's something where you're consuming alcohol and you're not consuming nutrient-rich foods because you're thinking about calories and you're trying to restrict calories and you're using alcohol to replace nutrient-dense foods, then that can definitely have an impact too. So it's like a cascade, no matter how you look at it.
So if you get a really good workout in, and then you go and grab, I know you used to tell me all the time to get protein and carbs after a really good workout, right? To start rebuilding that. But if you went to grab a cold beer, just oh, it sounds so refreshing. That's like, are you canceling out all the protein that you just ate?
I mean, you're not canceling it out necessarily, but are you drinking alcohol instead of refueling properly, or are you drinking the alcohol after you've refueled? You know what I mean?
I'm asking for a friend.
I think, it's something to consider. It's definitely something to consider. If you make a habit out of it, you're really going to benefit from skipping the alcohol after workouts if you're using it as a replacement. That's not to say that you should also then just be adding alcohol if you're also refueling. I'm just having visions of somebody with a smoothie in one hand and a beer in the other. It's not, I think you have to, realize that.
You might be onto something.
Yeah, seriously, double fisting. No, I think it goes back to quantity, but prioritize the refueling. And then you want to have alcohol at some point later in the night, do that, but give yourself some time to refuel properly and then indulge in whatever your drink of choice is, if you do drink. And I have to say as a disclaimer, if you don't drink, there's no benefits to starting drinking. Just put that out there.
During this pandemic, are you sure about that?
Seriously.
That's craziness.
Good answer. Good answer.
On that note, I don't mean to interrupt you, Scott, but on that note, like I see a lot of, and maybe it's just a sponsorship thing, and maybe it's just, I don't know, it's just up here, but it's been in every triathlon, I shouldn't say triathlon, but every marathon and half marathon that I've done. And even when I do Tough Mudders, there's always beer at the end of it. Like it's like a beer at the finish line. Is that just like a motivational thing, or is is that because there's even people that have because when I ran my first marathon, one of my friends said, we'll have a Mick Ultra the night before, and I'm like, I haven't drank in 3 years. Why would I do it? What? She's like, well, so I don't. Is that like the calm your nerves reaction? What? Is there any benefit to it?
My theory on that and the triathlon, you guys might have a totally different theory, but mine is like the camaraderie and people really enjoy being around other people. And there's like this kind of celebration factor to finishing a race, and that's part of that. So, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing by any means. But I think we just need to kind of look at it as like, I go back to like the quantity factor and thinking about like, well, how much are you actually consuming? And if you're going after your race and drinking, 5 or 6 drinks, like I would just question like, how is that going to have an impact on you long term? But I do think that I also have read, and it's been a little while, but I think there's like a connection between people who are doing endurance activities tend to kind of crave that sort of like feeling, that runner's high kind of feeling, and that there could potentially be that same kind of, they want that similar feeling if they're drinking as well. Does that make sense? Like there was some sort of, and I could be totally butchering that. It's been years since I've seen anything on that, but that's my theory. I think it has to do more with the camaraderie and the people want to be around other people and hang out and celebrate. Because it's a big accomplishment.
Oh, my computer. Sorry.
So, I guess I don't know. Katy mentioned the whole pandemic thing. Obviously, the pandemic thing is
throwing everyone off. In every aspect.
So why don't we take it to our triathlon coaches? We'll start with Laura. Coronavirus, how has it affected your athletes in training, and how have you had to adapt and change things around?
Yeah. So like the biggest thing that we notice with our triathletes is you keep hearing them, everybody wants to go swimming now. That's not true. Everybody misses going to the pool because all the pools closed. So that was the biggest thing, is making sure my athletes still get to do the workouts that they're not able to do because they don't have, the capacity to go to a pool because they're all closed. So just switching a lot of, like, instead of doing a swim, a lot of upper body and dry swim workout, doing the bands and things like that. I have one athlete that now had to go on a 8-week hiatus because he's an RN. He works and now has to go out to Jersey and work. And that's been the biggest thing, is mostly I have some healthcare workers that I coach, and unfortunately, and I'm a healthcare worker as well. So it's nice because I know how it is, and, trying to find the time to go in and get the workouts in. And then also the barriers, it's kind of, going out, and you can't go out and run for the long distances, or you can't go out on a long bike. I'm fortunate that a lot of my athletes are in areas that they aren't so strict right now. They're starting to lift a bit of the bans. So far races haven't been canceled that they're signed up for.
Yeah.
Because they're all later in the season. So still hopeful for everybody as we go. But again, it's something we have to do day by day. So yeah.
Patrick, your experience has been similar? You've having similar issues, or?
Yeah, it's been, what I find is that it's been a lot of day-to-day management. Everyone is in a different situation, very much dependent on, now how has their work and home life changed because of it. And then also, where they are in the country. The person, like we up here, you'd almost think we're unaffected, except people are walking around in masks. But I coach athletes in New York City and DC, and their ability to get outside is extremely limited. So we're having to manage that. And, from a a season standpoint, we're really looking at this, and our athletes are really buying into this as an opportunity as well. So, okay, we can't necessarily, do a race that we plan to in May, right? A lot of the May, June timeframe races are getting postponed or canceled. But here we are now, the weather's getting nice, and we're getting into a time of year when we would normally be very focused for particular events. And instead, now we have all of this time. And a lot of people, honestly, a lot of folks that I work with have more time than they've ever had to train. We can't really go a lot of places right now, right? It's 7:30 on a Friday night and we're all here. So, a lot of folks, if people traveled for work, that's not happening right now. Everyone's working from home, generally speaking, unless they're essential or frontline workers. And so that's providing some very unique opportunities. We've actually, we have a lot of athletes who are able now to shift to much higher volume training than ever before. And so we're sort of seizing that as an opportunity. We may never get this time again in our lives, where we have that where we're sort of stuck, right? And we can focus on ourselves, as long as people are in a stable situation. So we're really taking that opportunity.
Yeah, let me ask you this. I know we have two people here who their races, their Ironman races were just canceled. Do you retreat back into sort of a base training phase, or do you sort of still kind of go into like that build? I know I'm kind of like hitting you with terminology.
No, that's really good. I think it really depends on each person. What we've done, we sort of, it's split. So like even myself, for example, my own training has shifted very much to heavy duty base, like extensive base, bigger volume than typical for this time of year, because now we can get out for long rides, right? We can get out for a lot of low intensity work. If someone doesn't have a lot of time to train already, right? So let's say someone was already kind of time crunched in that 6 to 8 hour time frame a week. You can't, yes, you need to be careful about pushing the intensity too much, and because with intensity comes a mental cost, also mental energy and stress. And that's actually something that I've never had to manage as much as I have been the last 3 months, where, really watching each person's stress level in a day-to-day basis, right? If you back up 6 months ago, you could watch people's stress levels generally in longer trends, right? And yeah, okay, things get stressful at work or things get stressful at family, but now, we're in this news cycle that things change day to day, right? And people's careers are being impacted, people's families are being impacted. So I know there's a long-winded answer to you go to base or not. But yeah, I think you can really slice it two ways. You can go and like put a huge extended base phase in and build on that, or you can sort of look at it as we're going to build up to a peak and then we're going to go back to a base, and there's a lot of benefits to both, and it really depends on how mature an athlete is in their sport.
Gotcha.
We don't want to, right? You want to be careful about burnout on intensity, and or even burnout on too much volume.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say, at this point, if any of you guys out there have questions and you want to ask, you want to throw them out there. Obviously, we're all dealing with it. We're all dealing with this sort of new environment of training. I know Massachusetts, Katy, you're going to love this one if you haven't heard. Now, when you go outside, you got to wear a mask as of like 2 hours ago. Yeah, so that's going to be fun.
Wait, is that at all times?
Yeah.
I haven't read the specific sheet.
That's what it sounded like.
I don't know if it's like if you're going to the store or if you're out for a run.
No, mandatory when you're outdoors, but it just feels weird. I can hardly breathe running without a mask.
Me too. No, I can't do it. There's no way I'm doing it.
I don't know.
It might be the same as it is in New York, where they are saying that you need to wear a mask as long as you can't social distance, which, like, if you live in the city
Right.
like I do, it's impossible. Like, you can't, I mean, I'll go out for runs here. I have to wear a mask because there's so many people out and there's nothing else to do. And it's like everybody's out on the street. But it seems like if you guys were out, you know, I have a friend that lives in Medfield, Massachusetts, and
Yep.
she doesn't wear a mask.
Yeah.
But I'm not a mask expert.
I haven't worn one yet. And usually I go out early enough. And like tomorrow, I'm already thinking I'm going to go out even earlier tomorrow. And I guarantee there will be nobody out tomorrow. And I'd rather do that than have to wear the mask. Because like
The police officer is going to write you citation for not wearing a mask.
Yeah, well, I'll try to talk my way out of that, but
Let us
Yeah.
know how that goes.
yeah,
Well,
I
it's
will.
interesting
I'll
you mentioned
post. I'll
that-
let you know.
It's
Good,
interesting
Patty.
you mention off hours too, because that's actually something that has become a real tool for anybody who's trying to get on trails or where their workouts might be in a park. If that's the open space they can use to work out. If you go at 10 o'clock on a sunny Saturday, everyone and their cousin's going to be there. But if you go late in the day, close to sunset, or if you go early in the morning, that's been a big advantage for people. And it's
Definitely.
it's sort of a responsible thing to do in that it does help increase social distancing.
Yeah.
Very true.
But if anyone else has any questions or any stories about, the new environment or new, any kind of concerns and you guys want to spit them out, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll move on.
I have a question. Am I allowed to ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you talk about base training, this is obviously for Laura, Patrick, or Scott. Let's say you could categorize by like beginner, intermediate, advanced, or beginner, and all the way up to professional. Like if you could put an hour per week range within each of those categories, does that make sense? Could you assign an hour per week for base training? Because in my experience, and not to make this too much about me, but like I'm either training for something or I'm doing my general what feels good to me. I'm not really pushing myself to a limit by any means. Like I run and I ride, and when the pool's open, I might swim, and I do, random classes and that kind of stuff. But I don't know what base training level I should be following at this point if I'm not training for this half Ironman that's coming up or was coming up. But I want to maintain.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think of base training as so I think of base training not as like baseline training or like a base intensity, but it really comes down to think of it as you're laying the foundation for your work to come. And what you're really trying to do is build up resiliency and capacity in your aerobic systems. And so when you ask like about hours, it's almost the reverse of the question. It's more like, well, what time does someone have available? Because there are amateurs who have all kinds of time available, and there are people who race at a very high level that don't have a lot of time available. So that sort of informs what the mix of the training looks like in a base. So if you have lots of time, then you can do a lot more lower intensity training. You could do a very steady diet of very low intensity training, like zone 2 aerobic, lots and lots and lots of it. But you need to be doing like 15 or more hours a week of that. And I'm talking like in sort of a cycling and triathlon standpoint. I think that would be an awful lot for running if you were a run only athlete. But you need to be in that kind of time frame to be looking at doing only low intensity work. Anything less than that, which most people are going to fall into, most people are going to be in that 10-hour or less range realistically. You need to be mixing in, anything from tempo to sweet spot and even above threshold work, all throughout that. Yeah, and that's, what that's doing is it's challenging all of your energy systems.
Yeah, Yeah, makes sense.
Does that make sense? Laura, you want to add anything to that, or?
Yeah, just that it's going to be different for every person because everybody's going to have different goals and different things. Just like Patrick was saying, depending on how much time you can dedicate a week. Like, so when we're putting your plans together, you know, even if your race is canceled, there's going to be something, you know, we hopefully have another goal set up or something for you to aspire to. But just because we have a lot of time now and more availability to train and put work in doesn't necessarily mean we should. Because you've got an entire day doesn't mean you should go out and do a 3-hour bike ride if you just did a 2-hour run yesterday and you're going to do another 2-hour run tomorrow. Like, just because we have the time, I think is the biggest thing. Is so I have to tell my athlete, she's like, I'm home, I don't have anything to do and I'm bored, I want to go do this, can I go do this? I'm like, well, that's not really in your plan, you've already got this scheduled for today, we can trade, we can switch things up. But that's a big thing that I think a lot of people need to consider. Just because we have the time doesn't mean we should be going out and hammering it all day. We still have to look at big picture, because there is something called overtraining syndrome that not everybody's super aware of, and you're nodding. Yeah. So you work so hard and you put so much time in, and you get to like this just point where you're just going to plateau and your body just stops reacting, and you don't start getting better. You actually will see your body and your workout starting to decrease, and then it takes a long time to recover from that, and it'll ruin your entire year. I've seen it happen to like friends of mine that have had to cancel races because of it. So I think that's just my biggest thing with this whole thing, is just because we've got the time doesn't mean we should go.
Yeah.
And time available, it really comes down to what you can recover from, right? And that's the biggest thing. And that's when I say that 10-hour range, I kind of mean that not as like most people could shoehorn a little more time into their week than that, but most people couldn't recover from more than, say, 10 hours of quality training a week. And so that's a really important thing. When I talk to athletes, when we first start working together, I usually am given time estimates that I think are unrealistic. Oh, I can train 14 hours a week. I can train 14, 15 hours a week. Okay, well, let's start at a lower level and let's see how you do. Because, training with quality and intent, you can get a lot done without having to put in tons of time.
Yeah, I know Erin's here. Erin just had her race canceled, same race as Allison. And, we talked about it. We don't know exactly where they're going to what her options are going to be for the next race. Is she, are they going to just postpone for a little while? Is she going to do another race this year? Or are we going to have to wait till next year? And I think our initial thinking, or at least my initial thinking for her, is to kind of retreat to that 80-20 rule and really hold by it, that 80-20, like keeping the 80% of your training in that zone 2 area with the time that she has, to go kind of retreat into that base to make sure, the problem with base all the time and hours of base is it can get really boring, right? I mean, Patrick, you talked about being on that bike for hours and hours and hours. Yeah, having those hours are great, but sitting there riding zone 2 for 15 hours a week will drive you mad. And I know Erin, especially, she would, she wouldn't do it.
Well, and it comes down to also to where are those miles and hours being done? Because if it's on the trainer, oh heck no, we should not be doing that kind of volume. Like, you're just going to suck the joy out of the sport for somebody. Yeah. And that's where you can, that's a case if say like someone's circumstances are keeping them stuck inside, that's a case where you can get away from that 80-20 rule, because you're talking about, fewer hours in the week, fewer hours of training.
Yeah, Allison, well, actually, does anyone else have any questions regarding sort of like the coronavirus and the environment that we're in, and any way you should be adapting training? All right, we'll move to the next topic. Allison, I feel like we're taking your questions. I want to give you one. This was one that we got from the questionnaire that we put out there, so people could submit. It's a little lengthy, but the question is clearly a nutritional one. I'm having trouble losing weight despite low impact and HIIT exercises, high intensity interval training exercise. I'm pretty knowledgeable about general and bodybuilding diet mentality. However, endurance is new. I want to be able to perform, but also trim up, and it's not happening simultaneously. Tried the keto route, and my cholesterol went through the roof. I'm considering low carb cycling centered around workouts. What are your thoughts regarding that?
Yeah, I saw that question. I was like, wow, I would love to talk to this person one-on-one.
You are. It was my question.
Is that your question?
That was my question. Yes.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Okay, well, I will say the first thing. Well, the first thing I'll say is that a lot of my answer is going to be very general, because I think that, you have to really hone in on the person to know what's actually happening. I am sorry to hear about your keto experience, but also kind of happy that happened, because I don't recommend keto. For a lot of reasons, one of those being the long-term health impacts. Sometimes I think, especially with that group of the people that not professional athletes, but people who are still doing all of these really intense races, even if you're training 20 hours a week, that's still, 10 or 15% of your total time in life. So like, we're athletes for a small period of time, but we clearly are going to need to be focusing on our health in our life as a whole, and diet choices and diet patterns have a long-term impact on our health. So I like to kind of frame that. Keto is not something that I necessarily recommend for maybe anyone. There's few exceptions, maybe, but they're very specific, and a lot of the research there is not showing us the long-term impact, because it hasn't been something that, other than in very specific targeted groups, it hasn't been something that people have been doing for a long enough period of time for us to say that, yes, this is going to have a positive impact on our health, or a negative impact necessarily. But short term, it's showing, that in some cases you could have an exact example of what happened with you, which cholesterol spikes, clearly not going to be beneficial for heart health, right? So carb cycling, I think, ultimately what's going to happen with carb cycling is that it's going to come down to total calories. I mean, all of these diets are really, they're clearly going to have an impact on macronutrients that you're consuming and total nutrient diversity. But when you start talking about weight loss, if that's the ultimate goal, it really does come down to calorie intake. So when you're carb cycling, if you're reducing calories, because oftentimes what happens with carb cycling is your fat and protein. I mean, are you thinking about doing like you would be counting macronutrients, I'm assuming?
Oh yeah. I have for a long time. I mean, like I said, with the bodybuilding thing, I mean, I would track every single bite I put into my mouth. And, like I follow, and I do, I consider Triathlon Terran. I know some of you guys have talked about him and followed him and whatnot. And he has done a lot of diet advice and whatnot from Dan Plews. And he's, big on kind of the, not necessarily full-blown keto, but more fat adaptation. And I mean, I can't say that I have a huge amount of weight to lose. I don't. I mean, I'm only between 170 and 165, 170 pounds. Ideally, my half marathon is in, it got moved. Hopefully they still have it. It got moved to the end of August. Ideally, I'd be down to 155, but I know I could get there, but it's been a teeter between, because I mean, obviously 155 pounds is going to go a little bit faster than 165 pounds. I mean, and like I said, I don't need a body that's going to.
That actually might not be the case. Weight and your weight does not have necessarily a direct connection to your performance. You can be at a higher weight if you're fueling properly and training properly. Then that's going to have much more of an impact on your performance than your weight alone. So I think understanding what is the ultimate goal of following a diet, and if the outcome is to improve performance, then I would encourage anyone to really focus on not only the training piece, which, that's where the coaches are key in that, but the proper recovery and nutrition components, and ensuring that you're fueling your body properly for the training too is going to have a significant impact. And when you talk about carb cycling, it will be really important for you to make sure, if you're doing this, red flags start popping up in my mind when I think about people cutting out categories of foods, because you are really increasing the potential to eliminate beneficial nutrients. And there's also so glycogen, I'm sure everybody's aware of glycogen. if you're eliminating carbohydrates to the extreme, that you're not then properly refueling and giving your rebuilding that glycogen in your muscles and your liver, of course, then could that have a negative impact on your performance? Yeah, because our bodies focus on, they want to use, the primary source of fuel is carbohydrates. You can be fat adapted for sure, but that happens with increased training and increased fitness level.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I feel like performance wise, I'm pretty good. I mean, as far as, nutrition and whatnot during, before, during, and after, I mean, I'm pretty consistent, and I've done enough of the smaller races where I feel like, I feel like I got a good hone on that now, but like I said, I want to, like I said, ideally lighten up a little bit. I mean, especially, when I look at, because I'm going mainly, my focus for the last couple of years in triathlons was sprint tries. And so, I mean, it's not as crucial to be lighter. I mean, I could still go pretty fast for the size I was. But, when I get into the longer ones and, I look at, I've got a pretty good amount of leg strength, but as far as, the weight, like I said, my legs are going to be able to push 155 pounds a lot faster than they are 165 pounds, and I've experienced
too, I think as a general statement with weight loss is that you don't just lose fat when you lose weight.
Right. And that's one thing that I've worried about too. I did, since I've started triathloning, I've lost about 30 pounds, and I know not all of it's fat, and I'm okay with that because, I know that, the density of it can impact the swim, especially. But, I'm not at a point, where I need to look amazing and be on the premier edition of the Ordinary Marathoner's calendar. But
now you will be.
Probably on February, so you have to look at me the least amount.
Every month. You're going to be every month.
Well, right? I guess this is a general statement too, because I know, a lot of this is going to be very specific to you as an individual. So I'm more than happy to have a conversation about this one-on-one. But I think just as a general statement, when it comes to weight loss, focusing on making sure that your slower weight loss is going to be more beneficial because it reduces that risk of losing primarily muscle.
Yep.
Because that's the last thing we want to lose. And also understanding that, making sure you're getting adequate calorie intake that will still help with some of that weight loss if that's your goal, but then also fueling properly with the timing of nutrients, making sure you're getting enough protein. Protein is really key for resistance training, but it's also really key for endurance activity too. And then also, I think, one thing is we get very fixated, we being just, I think, humans in general, get really fixated on that number on a scale. But I always will challenge anybody that I talk to think about other measures of success and other measures of progress. So looking at your perceived effort for the same amount of distance or activity, looking at your timing, right, or the FTP, all of that, the output you have, your endurance level, just all of these things, your energy level in general, even down to I ate X number of, I met my goal today for whatever the category of food is, or I was able to skip out on, one of these extra sodas that I usually drink or whatever. But somehow having a measure that has nothing to do with your weight, just so that you can really, if you're into measuring, then that's really helpful because it can those can have really great impacts on your performance and health too.
Do you have a base percentage as far as macronutrients that you recommend as a as a base for, because I've always, back when I was doing a lot of bodybuilding and the heavy lifting and stuff, I would get really honestly insulin sensitive. And if I tried carb cycling when I was doing that and really kind of ran into a lot of gastrointestinal problems where, after lifting, I would just, I would try, the high carb, high protein type stuff, liquid form first and then solid form. And center my carbs around my workouts. And I had a lot of success with that. But like I said, when I would get into that high carb range, anything, and I've done, the book I had just read, Racing Weight by Matt Fitzgerald, kind of gave a general, basis, and I've kind of been trying to base what I've been doing on that. But even the amount of carbs that he talks about me taking in, I'm scared to do, just because of that insulin sensitivity. Do you have like a specific ratio that you recommend to endurance athletes versus, I know what I was doing when bodybuilding was, I was taking in 300 grams of protein a day in the off season, and then, you fluctuated your carbs based on when you wanted to do a cut or a bulk or whatever. And, the protein and fat stayed relatively the same throughout the year, regardless of the phases. Now that, my phases are different, it's in more building and race day and whatever phase, do you have, is there like a recommended macro percentage that, you give to athletes or anything of that nature? Like I said, admittingly, I do a lot of the.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. We're interrupting, Mike. Wait.
No, go ahead. If you got stuff to say, go.
No, she's going to tell you about the plates. The heart,
okay.
Right?
I'm going to mention the plates. You're so smart. But I think, also, I'll mention like that 45 to 65% carbohydrate falls right in that healthy eating pattern of a diet, right? So that's a pretty significant range. For some people, 45% extremely low. For some people, that might be extremely high. Like it's just, but that range is where the healthy eating pattern, there's a lot of, you run the risk of, if you go below that, of missing out on essential nutrients without serious modifications to the diet. So 45 to 65% for carb, and then you can modify from there. So for protein, definitely looking at, for the endurance athlete, between 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. You can even go all the way up. In some cases, there's research for people who are doing really heavy endurance activity and lots more time than a lot of the average person might be doing. They could even potentially go up to like 2.5 grams per kilogram for protein, but that 1.2 to 2.0 grams per kilogram is going to be adequate. And then the fat ratios kind of fall around after you figure the rest of that out.
And a lot of that, and I always have to be careful of that. Back when I very, very first started, I did transformation contests, and you see all those things, especially in January. And I had one that was extreme, and I do a lot, because I have had some success in that area. I went from 220 to 230 to 160 at one time, and that was my competition weight. So I wrote diets for people and would help people with that kind of stuff in that realm. But I won't do anything, or for me to go below 50 to 60 grams of fat a day, that totally destroyed my testosterone levels. And so I kind of gear on a low day for like between 75 and 80, high day being maybe 110, 120. But like I said, ideally I could get a little bit more fat adapted so that I could maybe not, and I look at, as far as nutrition and consumption during a race, if I don't have to as much, and if I'm more fat adapted, I feel like I don't have to consume more than, the water and the electrolytes and all that stuff. So I don't have to worry about carrying a bunch of gels and, waffles and all that stuff.
Sorry, you're going to have to carry the gels and the waffles. I'm going to always recommend it. You're going to have to take in carbohydrates during any endurance activity over an hour. Like it is advantageous to your perforence. There is no benefit to
I've
skipping
definitely,
carbs.
right. And I have in every race I've done. And like I said, with the size of my legs, I usually go about every 45 minutes. That's kind of my gauge is, there's even times if we do like a 2-hour ride, I'll consume on the bike even just in our group rides, just because, every 45 minutes, if not, I don't necessarily feel it during the race, but once I'm done, my legs are shot. Like I could literally not even walk. And that's kind of been, where I've had the success. like I said, and truthfully, when I say that I count things, and maybe you can, and maybe this is maybe where I'm, in a sense, making the mistake, is I don't, anytime I can, like I said, anytime I'm over, if I'm doing a 50-minute ride, I'm not going to consume it 45 minutes, but if I'm doing an hour and a half, I am. But I don't count when I'm tracking my macronutrients. I don't count anything that I eat during a race or a workout or anything like that. Like, I don't count that in my daily intake.
Mm-hmm.
Count the jelly beans, Romans.
What'd you say?
What?
I told him count his jelly beans.
Count his jelly, right? Roman's famously fuels with black jelly beans.
Only on the trainer, because I tried them one time in the back of in my pocket, and that was
Ooh,
I got rid of that. I got rid of that shirt. I saw a guy pull a peanut butter and jelly sandwich out of his. That's not as gross as the peanut butter and jelly sandwich that I saw a guy do in the marathon.
That's pretty gross.
That's a really great fueling option, for sure.
It is, but not when it doesn't have a bag around it.
Oh, no.
He legitimately just pulled it out of his pocket.
My very first triathlon that I ever did, it was years ago, and clearly had no clue what was happening with any of it. And I decided to get frozen grapes and bring those with me. It was number one, not a good course to be fueling with, and number two, literally the messiest, most disgusting thing that you could have imagined, because of course they didn't stay frozen, they were just mush and disgusting. So bad and sticky. Yeah, don't do that.
You're the sports dietitian?
It's interesting it's interesting that Allison mentioned the weight doesn't necessarily affect performance, because I know this is a conversation I've had with other people about weight and how it affects, what I perceive affects my performance in running, and how discouraged I get because I've gained so much weight, right? So I'm interested in hearing a little more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we have to say, yes, weight could affect performance, but it doesn't always affect performance, if that makes sense. So like, you might or might not see a benefit to losing weight if you're not also pairing that with proper training and you're fueling properly and you're not also losing lean muscle mass. I mean, I don't know if Patrick and Laura, if you guys have had experience where you've had somebody rapidly lose weight and then also their performance suffered. I mean, that's a real thing.
Oh, it really is. And it's, I've actually worked in sort of the aftermath of that with people, because I'm always so careful to avoid it with the people I'm working with currently. But the losing weight is stressful on the body. The body does not like giving up weight. And so Allison's point about being slow about it is absolutely right on the money. Have to do it almost painfully slow if you're trying to maintain a high quality training. And one thing that I've noticed is that when people are putting too much focus on weight loss, they chronically underfuel their workouts, and that is extra stressful on the body. And Mike, one thing you mentioned when we were just getting going is that you're doing most of your trainer rides fasted. That can be relatively stressful on the body. And especially if you're not fueling during the workouts. I don't know if you are or not. Maybe you're eating jelly beans 5 in the morning.
There's times, yeah. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, but what I've seen is one of the things that's jumped out to me, especially lately, is people are actually pretty good about fueling outside workouts. They sort of know, like, okay, I'm going to go out for an hour. I'm going to go for an hour and a half. I take my gels and I take my or my bars or whatever. But then those same people will do an hour-long workout and they'll drink just plain water on the trainer and nothing else. And then their perceived exertion goes through the roof. Their recovery the next day suffers. So, the point being, it's extremely important to sufficiently fuel your workouts. You're going to get better quality. You're going to reduce the stress on your body. Training is stressful on its own. Losing weight is stressful on its own. We don't want to add any other unnecessary stress that's not going to be productive.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
So should I quit teaching? Because that gives me a lot of stress. And so I'm gonna tell my boss tomorrow that you told me that I should quit teaching.
Not productive to you. Well,
I
it
want
may
to
be true.
say
It may
no.
not be productive to you going fast.
I did. I will. My claim to fame. I did help a kid on his math. He FaceTimed me doing math problems while I was on the trainer.
Did your
So I
perceived
have-
exertion
I
go
can-
through the roof?
I can honestly say I have long distance taught because he so then he gave me the idea. I did a YouTube video where I actually read a story while on my trainer. I read a book, and it's on. I've got a YouTube channel that's connected to some of the kiddos in school and whatnot. So
Yeah, post that up on our page.
I
And
will.
Laura, what's been your experience in terms of weight loss and fueling?
So it's something that I always tell my athletes to monitor because it could be a key indicator that we're either overtraining or, like you were saying, you're not fueling properly for, outside of it. Because once it gets into an athlete's mind that they want to lose the weight along with the training, they either tend to go harder in the training when it's not a prescribed, or they're not eating properly, which can result in them getting sick and missing training. And then we always have to worry about things like eating disorders, because it's a really slippery slope when we have athletes that are trying to do, you read the latest trend that's online and you're going with that trend that you're reading. Like the fasting thing, I know is a new thing that's come out, but some people are taking it to the far end extreme, and then getting sick, the eating disorder is such a real thing with athletes, especially our younger female athletes, that we really have to be on the lookout for. So I always just have my athletes, if it's a goal of yours, we're going to, work on it together. I'm not a nutritionist. I never claimed to be a nutritionist. And that's a huge thing I tell my athletes, because if they're coming to me for dietary advice, I can't help you with that because I don't have that education. I don't have that background. And I'll refer them to a nutritionist, but I can help you with some basic stuff and telling you what, for your workouts you need to do and that. But as far as the monitoring the weight loss and stuff, it's just really keeping an eye on it and making sure that my athletes being encouraged to be open and comfortable with coming to me and talking to me about that stuff. And so far I haven't had, thankfully, any issues with my athletes. They've all been really great and understanding about the nutrition part, because that's such a big thing where a lot of coaches try and take it on when they don't really have that background, and it becomes a selling point. But it's just so important for us to just be honest and say, we're going to pass you to the expert. We're going to send you to Allison.
Well, and that's why I posted the question. Tell me if I'm off base here, if I need to do more. My wife keeps telling me honestly that she thinks I don't eat enough for as much as I train. I'm on the training plan for, it hasn't been canceled yet, but it will. But a 70.3 at the end of July. And, so I'm on that training plan, and I'm at about 2,700, like I said, I'm 165, 170 pounds, depending on the day. Because for whatever reason, my weight fluctuates really quick. I think a lot of it has to do just with the size of my legs and the amount of inflammation that comes in. I do try to drink a lot of water. I'm minimal gallon a day. I've actually got a gallon jug in my fridge that the kids know you don't drink from that. Like, that's Dad's jug. And they'll even come down and tell me, like, if I'm getting ready for sleep and I've got water left in that jug, they'll sit and make me drink it. But am I off base by being at about 2,700 calories, usually, like I said, 45% carbs? Am I off base?
Honestly, I really can't give you specifics. I would have to ask you a lot more questions just about how much you're training. And feel free to email me. Anyone can reach out to me.
Sure,
am
I'll do
available,
that.
obviously, on Facebook. But yeah, more than happy to have conversation. Sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Some great deals going on too.
Yeah.
Consultations.
Good deal.
Mike, I actually wanted to piggyback off from you, Mike, because Patrick, I was working with Patrick for quite a while. And before I started working with him, I did a lot of figure shows. And it destroyed my body. Like, I would never recommend any woman doing it. I mean, I didn't, and I shared this with Patrick. I went, I had my son in 2009 and I didn't have a menstrual cycle until, funny story, I didn't have one until about 4 months ago, and I went almost 10 years without having it.
Wow.
And then now I'm pregnant. So,
Congrats.
And a lot of it, I will say, because once I started working with Patrick, because I was counting my carbohydrates were so low. And I was still, I mean, at the time, you know, I was early, like mid-20s when I was doing my figure shows. And when we talk about weight, I'm probably, and Patrick knows me, like I'm a tiny little person, and I am actually 15, 20 pounds heavier now than I was when I was competing.
Right, and your power numbers destroy anything you did when we first started.
Yeah, I mean, I put weight on, and it was good weight. I mean, when I was on stage competing, my second stage or my second show, I weighed in at 97 pounds. I'm 5 foot, so I mean, but I mean, and then now I remember talking to Patrick. I was getting worried because my weight was creeping up, and creeping up. I was at like 114, 115, and thinking, oh my gosh, I feel so fat. But all of a sudden, you know, my system started working again. Patrick can attest, my power numbers were like, you know, skyrocketing, and I felt good. So,
right. And you consistently felt good. Your sleep quality was improving. Everything got better.
Yeah. I mean, have you heard of, there was one question in the list that came in about the women are not small men. Somebody had asked that question. I don't know if they're on this, but there's a Dr. Stacy Sims. Do you know her?
Yeah, I read her book, and actually, so I'm a certified personal trainer, and then I'm also a lifestyle coach too, and work with a lot of athletes. And actually, I really work now predominantly with women because they get so obsessed with the scale. Mm-hmm. And like, one of my clients like texted me the other day. She's like, I've been eating well and I've been exercising and I gained weight. And I'm like, don't let the scale be the only thing that you monitor for progress. I mean, her runs she's crushing it. She went from doing a 5K at a 12-minute mile to running a half marathon at a 9-minute mile. And I'm like, and you're
throw the scale away.
Yeah. And you're complaining because you gained a pound. I'm like, you probably just didn't poop enough that morning. Like,
that's kind of where I was going with the depending on the day, but I didn't want to go there. But
you
opened a door.
All I do is talk about pooping in my clients. But one question I did have, though, for anyone, because Patrick had said, and this is going to be more unique to me, with, you know, fueling more than just water, especially if it's like an hour. What I have found is now, like, my goal is to train like 2-3 days in a row and then take a day off. But I'm finding that I'll train for a day, for an hour on my trainer, and then I'm like exhausted the next day. And I know a lot of it is the pregnancy, but my question to, you know, maybe Allison or you know, any of you guys, what would be a good nutrition source, especially for me, for cycling or running or whatever? Because I am like, after I train, I am wiped. I am so tired.
I think, you know, since you work with Patrick already, you probably have some info from him. So why don't we ask Allison that question? What do you think she should be fueling with during her 1 hour workouts?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, especially if it's an hour, it really depends on intensity. So it is interesting, Patrick, that you mentioned bringing your calories. What was that?
No.
I totally missed that. I don't know what was that.
Mike was showing off his bag of
yeah. Are those licorice, by the way? Is that what that is?
That's the flavor.
Oh.
Appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would recommend focusing on what you're eating before. So making sure that you're going into the workout with enough carbohydrate in your system and enough energy. So it depends on how much time you have prior to the workout, and then focusing on the after too of the 1 to 2 hour time frame, or, you know, immediately after all the way up to even 2 hours. 2 hours is getting kind of late with some of that window that you have in the recovery, but focusing on, I call them the recovery R's, where you're refueling, restoring, and replacing. So you're replacing carbohydrates, refueling, you're also getting the restoring from the protein, and then also fluids as well. So it's really focusing on those 3 things. But if you're only exercising for an hour and you're experiencing such extreme fatigue, then, I mean, I guess one question would be, did this happen before you got pregnant? And if it did, then clearly there's something else going on. But if it's since you got pregnant, then you probably need to adjust either what you're taking in to properly fuel so that you're getting more, or you need to reduce intensity. I mean, pregnancy is, especially if you're in early pregnancy, that's gonna change everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, I mean, when I was working with Patrick, I would get tired, but that's also because at the time, because I'm a gym owner, so now I'm closed, so I've got all the time in the world. And actually, I decided to close permanently. I don't know if I told you yet, Patrick, but I closed my doors permanently. I'm not even reopening, because I'm like, you know what? I'd rather be. You know, it's actually something I've wanted. I'm sick of getting home at like 10:30 at night and waking up at 3 o'clock the next morning and starting it all over again. I couldn't keep up with it. So when I was working with Patrick, I was tired, but I think that was more my schedule. And I was starting to get more sleep, but it is different now that I'm pregnant. And I often find myself, and I've said this to Patrick, that I have this like internal battle with myself where it's like, okay, am I really as tired as I think I am, or am I feeling unmotivated? So it's like, I have this constant battle. It's like, okay, do I sleep or do I train?
And
because will it wake me
motivation has never been a problem for Jess, ever. Ever.
You answered that question.
So, I mean, like yesterday, I'm like, well, you know, I'll just lay down for a little while. And then if I feel good, and I ended up sleeping, I think I took a nap for like 3 hours. I'm like, okay, I think I was tired. So yeah, I'll try to add, because I feel like my nutrition is pretty good. Like I get up usually in the morning, and I'll have protein, I'll have oatmeal. I actually eat quite a bit. Then I'll wait like 2 hours, and then I'll train, and then I'll have protein, carbohydrates, a little bit of fat, like within that 30-minute time frame, and then I'm still just really tired. So it really could be the intensity. So I'll try to back it off. It's not my nature, but I will try and see if that helps.
Well, you could keep
increasing. Sorry, go.
I was just gonna say, if knowing you, so you know, we're not currently working together, but if knowing you, the intensity is something that you crave a little bit. So you can drop the overall volume down, you know, instead of an hour ride, do a 40-minute ride.
Okay.
Right. And lower the stress on the body that way. And maybe drop the intensity as well.
Smart coach.
Yeah.
So,
and you could maybe try to increase, I heard oatmeal and something else, I don't know, but you might benefit from increasing the carb a little bit more if you're 2 hours out. Or getting something small, like 25 extra grams of carb in that hour time frame before the workout.
Okay, I'll try that.
Well, it's interesting that Jessica brought this up, because I too attempted to do a bikini competition a long time ago. And I remember being on that extreme diet, and I think actually I've never recovered from that. And honestly, I think I spoke to Allison in the past, and I've spoken to her about my energy levels. They're just non-existent. I'm always tired. And I do feel like prior to starting that diet, the bikini diet, I was fine. And then that somehow messed me up. You know, the no carbs this week, carbs next week. And yeah, I don't think I've ever recovered from that.
No, I don't. I mean, not to go in too much because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I battled really bad with anorexia when I was like late teens, early 20s, and then had my son. And then I recovered. I felt really good. I had my son. And then somebody had asked me, hey, you want to train for a figure competition? My husband was saying, no, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And I'm like, no, I'm good, I'll do it, you know, because I don't listen to him. And it was awful. It was the worst decision I ever made because it put me into that whole mindset again of dieting and that I have to look a certain way. And I think as women, especially, I feel like we feel internally that we're being judged anyway by our peers, by social media, everything. And then to literally be on stage and be judged on the way you look. And I remember my first show, I won, and I was on top of the world. I'm like, well, I'll do it again. And I did another one, and I came in last. And I remember thinking I worked my ass off, and just because it's completely objective. It's not like a triathlon where it's a concrete start and finish, you know. It's so subjective to whoever wants to, like, they may not like the way you look that day and they judge you completely different. And I mean, this was back in 2011. And still, like, I have a hard time with, like you said, eat a little bit of carbohydrates beforehand. And I'm like, I'll try. You know, it plays mind games on you. And, you know, I'm right there with Allison. It's like, you know, I try to teach a lot of my clients. I'm like, just stop dieting. You know, there's so many diets out there. If you just eat healthy 80% of the time of your life, you're going to be just fine. You know, I would not recommend shows to anybody, just with my own personal experience.
Yeah. It's good.
Prep is hell on the family too.
It
yeah.
was awful. I mean, that was probably the worst patch for my relationship with my husband too, because it was, you're so obsessed with what you're eating, you're so obsessed with your training, and then your mood swings are out of this world.
Oh yeah.
It's just awful. I don't know why anybody would put themselves through it. And honestly, I started cycling because I was forced to be a spin instructor. And I felt like a hypocrite that I was teaching spinning and I wasn't cycling. So I got my first hybrid bike and I'm like, well, I'm not going fast enough. This sucks. So I bought my first road bike and I did my first race like 4 years ago and did pretty well. And then I reached out to Patrick, and honestly, cycling, I would say, like, saved my life, just mentally, physically. You know, I never thought in a million years. I mean, I had every doctor telling me if you were ever to get pregnant again, it would be a miracle because my hormone levels were awful. I didn't have enough estrogen level. And then my system kicked back in, and, you know, so now it's just, I love the endurance sport. I would never go back to the weight. Like, I still do weights because it's, you know, you need training, but I would never do it as a sport again.
Yeah. And, you know, just mentioning cycling and spinning there, you know, we have a lot of runners here too. And I see June Walker out there walking outside hiking. And that was one of the questions actually that was written up here. And I think it fits in here because we also talked about sort of like that low resistance training earlier. So the question here, I'm going to go to Laura because I feel like I haven't heard from you in a while.
I know you're so quiet, Laura.
Well, I'm tired.
So using that all as a segue, can I use hiking as a component to training, and if so, how?
Hi, Junie. First up. Yes, and actually I do have a lot of athletes that will do hiking and like to do hiking because they live in areas like Bend and other beautiful places here up in Mass. And I think hiking is a great training tool because you're doing a couple different things. You're getting, like you said, the low impact training. You're getting some agility training because you're, you know, vigilant in where you're stepping, you know, because it's not level ground for the majority of places where people are going hiking. If you pick up the pace a little bit and you take the hike quickly, you know, a little quicker, you're trail running.
I love that.
Right. And actually you get a good core workout too with hiking, which a lot of people don't think of. Another thing that you could do if you're going out and doing a hike and you're just looking to get a little bit more bang for your buck is throwing on like a rucksack, just putting on a backpack or something that's got a little bit of a weight to it that's just going to make you work a little bit harder when you're out and doing it. And just one thing that to have people be, you know, cognizant of when you're doing it is hiking is a physical activity. It's beautiful and it's fun and it's relaxing and it can be a really enjoyable experience, but it's still also, you know, going to take some physical stresses off on you. So if you're going to do it, it's something that's good if you're working with a coach to talk about and say, I want to go and do this big long hike this day and it's going to be a challenge because we might want to alter your workout and have you maybe not go do that run right after you're going hiking. It could be take place of your run, you know, and not have you doing both. But yeah, I definitely have athletes that incorporate the hiking as part of a routine. And it's good because it's like we said, the mental, like it's a break from the norm. It's a variable. It's something that's going to switch it up and keep it refreshing and keep it fun and engaging the athlete. So I totally am, for it.
Yeah. Patrick, I know that you live up kind of in the Lake Placid area too, and I'm sure that.
Jealous.
Yeah.
You know, we try to use that as much as we can. You know, it's a playground, so why not get to use it? You know, and then you can do training that doesn't feel like training or doesn't feel like a workout. You know, one thing that Laura mentioned with the rucksack, a trick that we do pretty often is to have people put water, use that as their weight in the pack, and then dump it out. Like, especially if you're going, say, up hill on the way out and you're coming downhill on the way back, that downhill hiking with weight can be pretty fatiguing on the legs and can lead to soreness. So you can dump the water out when you get up top, and now you've got a lighter pack on the way back.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I use a lot of walking, especially with my my half marathon and marathon athletes. You know, especially if you're not, you know, if you're just concerned with finishing the race and not necessarily concerned for time, and you need to get that distance, a lot of times really just getting used to being on your feet for that long is part of the challenge. So yeah, you may be able to run those miles in 9-minute miles, 10-minute miles, whatever your goal is, you might be able to physically do that. But when you get out there on race day, a lot of you guys haven't really run a full 26.2 inch. You know, you've done 18, you've done whatever you cap out at. And those last miles, they can be really painful. So getting out there and walking and hiking, any kind of cross training, cycling. I know, you know, a lot of runners are very kind of like, they're like, cycling.
That's me.
You know, but Sarah, I see you on here. I know you've been riding.
Because I'm being forced to, but yeah, I'm that runner that hates cycling.
and you know how it is to do a marathon and walk most of it too.
And not train.
Oh, no, no.
I think the most I did was 9 miles about 5 weeks before my marathon. It was funny because I remember, because I was in Colorado, so that was my cross training, was hiking. And that was the biggest thing, was I knew I needed to be on my feet. I was guessing in 8 hours. So I was like, okay, if I could do it. I did it in spurts, and I think I did 4 hours at one point. I'm like, oh, this is fine. But you get in there, especially your first marathon. I was thankful in the best marathon ever for slow runners, because there's aid stations every mile. They were open for 8+ hours. And even as the last person in, like, there was support the whole way. I feel horrible for people that haven't trained, have these 6-hour cutoffs that are just like stressing out because they're not going to finish. And I thank the race directors I'm friends with them now, and just tell them all the time, like, you guys have the best marathon. I'm gonna get crying. What the hell? it was, if you're gonna have a first marathon, that was the best experience. So,
your story was great. I loved having you on the podcast and hearing that. So one last question. You know, we're kind of approaching the end. I think we had like a 9 o'clock sort of rough cutoff, but if you guys want to stick around for a while, that's fine. Just go around the loop here and ask one more question of the coaches and Allison. And if you don't have an answer for this is kind of like off the cuff, but it was on our list of questions. What is a piece of bad advice that each of you guys have gotten through the years on a regular basis, and something that you hear that people just kind of say casually, but turns out it's actually really bad advice that you wouldn't listen to now? Let's start with Patrick.
Oh no, I'll pass to who if someone's got one quicker.
All right.
Go ahead, Laura.
So I have a lot of athletes that I've worked with that it's their first time getting to this longer distance. So the 70.300, or full athletes, and we're looking at their plan and we're going over. I'm kind of letting them know what their big weekends are going to look like, so they can plan ahead. There's always variables; it's going to change, but when you start hearing other people telling them, well, you should be riding this many hours at this point, and you should be at this, distance, you should at least do 5 century rides before your full Ironman. And I'm like, what? No. A lot of people think you need to do this huge, extravagant thing. You have to run 5 marathons before your actual marathon. No. Stop. You're training. You don't need to do a 25-mile training, warm up for your marathon. If you can, if you're going to hurt yourself, it's going to be bigger. So that's a huge thing that I've been having to have a conversation with my athletes, because everybody's, a professional in our sports, and telling them that they should be doing all these ridiculous things and having to say no. And then having them come back to me and be like, oh, so-and-so who told me to do that? Yeah, they're not racing because they're injured now. Good. Thank you. Thank you for coming and talking to me about this. But yeah, that's the biggest thing is I hear people going out and just blowing their load early and doing these huge rides and these huge workouts that are way too early in the season. So
Allison, I feel like diet, this would be you probably hear bad advice regularly.
You're right.
Is there anything that sticks out? I mean, is there anything that sticks out with
I know. I was just thinking when you asked that question, I was like, wow, I have 8,000 things that I can say right now. I will touch on one, and that's that there's this thought that the only way to maximize performance or be successful as an athlete is to take supplements in some form. I just think that there's an overemphasis on engineered nutrition in a lot of cases, and real food can be and should be the primary focus. So the thought that you have to have supplements or that you should focus on supplements is something that I think is very misunderstood, and it's not always necessary or even required. So, I mean, I think that's probably one big one that sticks out, and we haven't talked much about supplements. They definitely can have their place, but they're not a requirement to be a successful or athlete by any means. And I'm talking about, things like pre-workouts or, supplements that you're taking in pill form. There's obviously going to be a need for engineered nutrition, and there's a huge benefit when it comes to carbohydrates that you're taking in during exercise, because it's all formulated for optimal absorption, and that can be beneficial, and it's easy to carry, and a lot of those things are going to be key. But I think in just as our general diet, what we're doing the majority of the time, you should be focusing on whole foods and not supplements to get your nutrition.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Think of anything, Patrick?
Got it. Yeah. So, this is something that I hear most often in the world of triathlon, but it does crop up other places too. And that would be that we should only ever be training at, for the up to the level of intensity that we're going to be racing at. So let's say someone's going to do a half Ironman. Okay, well, you're going to be racing basically at tempo or right around there for that whole time. But that doesn't mean that you should be training only up to that, because you're leaving a tremendous amount of growth potential on the plate there without training your other energy systems. And then also, you're missing a lot of benefit from being able to make your training more time efficient as well. So like even for marathoners, we do a ton of speed work. I would much rather see someone doing speed work and sparing distance runs than sort of the old school build up, like if you look at those, was it the New York road race club, right? Where it's, okay, here we're going to take you to a marathon, but by the time you've got to the marathon, you've done 3 runs over 20 miles already, right? And it just tears people up physically, right? It leads to a lot of injuries. So I think that one's huge. I heard the way it was first presented to me, I was working with a sprint triathlete who had been formerly coached by someone who only really cared about working with long distance triathletes. And she was told that triathletes don't go anaerobic. Triathletes don't do anything anaerobic. We don't ever stand up on our bicycles. Yeah.
That's part of riding a bike.
Not true. And we're most certainly going to do that in training.
I'm sure Jessica, having been trained by you, can vouch for that you push her a little harder than just race pace at times.
Yeah, probably too many times.
But I agree. I've been using the bike trainer a lot this year, and I've seen some really big gains, and a lot of it's been just high interval efforts, just working hard and not just doing like my normal zone 2 forever type of workout. So it's really worked. And I think if I had one, I'll answer my own question. But if I had one, we talked a lot tonight about that base training, that zone 2. And we talked about walking, the importance of even just getting out to walk if you're training for a marathon or hiking, that kind of thing. I think in my earlier years that I was a run-only runner. I was a, get out. I think that stems from sort of like my old pig-headedness football, baseball kind of training, where if your coach told you to run a mile, if you walk, you're in trouble. You can't walk while the coach tells you to run a mile. And so I was headed in that thought. And I tell you, once I started training with walk intervals and rest intervals, and I did my first Ironman, and I had to walk. I had no choice because I was just dead. And it turned out my time wasn't as bad as I thought it was. So I think, that pig-headed notion of you got to run all the time in training and races, as opposed to having a smart and practice and trained approach of run walk at times when it's necessary, especially for us athletes who aren't professionals, who are kind of just, going at this for our own purposes. I don't know. I think to me that was, I wish I would have had that piece of advice, and I got it when early on. I just didn't listen to it. I wish I would have listened to it a little bit early on. I have more questions here. I will totally forgive you guys if you want to get going. I know a few have already mentioned, but I'll open it up. If I know, Laura, I know you might have to go, but if any of you guys have any other questions for the panel or anybody else, I'd love to hear them. I'm good to go. I still have at least half a glass of wine, so.
Yeah, all night. It is Friday night.
Could be happy 2 hours.
I actually have a question for Patrick, if I can.
Go ahead.
Sure.
So obviously this is probably going to be geared more towards me too, but it could be kind of general. And I know Scott and I have talked a lot about this. I mean, the majority of our conversations are wrapped around this. With triathletes, I found that everybody has the skill set that they're best at or what they like the best. I come from a running background. I prefer to run. If I have my choice, I'm going to go run or swim. That's my other choice. I am not a good cyclist. I'm a baby cyclist. I look fantastic on the trainer. I have great power numbers. I know I have the leg strength. You put me outside and I crawl. So how would you, Patrick, approach somebody who is freaked out by riding outside and needs to build that confidence and also has possibly some physical difficulties overcoming that?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something you are not alone in that experience. The advent of the smart trainer over the last few years, there's a lot of athletes who have come into the sport and have gotten pretty darn strong, and yet are relatively inexperienced in terms of, like you said, riding outside. You know, and like Scott, when we were talking on the podcast, you know, this the hill basically right behind my house coming down out of Cascade Pass on the Ironman course, that terrifies a lot of people, right? U-turns in a race course baffle people, right? Coming out in and out of transitions. I see a lot of hands. So there's a few ways to do this. I mean, one, you have to get outside. That's a component, but you have to do it safely, right? It's not like you don't learn to ride a motorcycle by just jumping on a motorcycle and getting on the highway, right? The best thing you can possibly do is look up a certified skills instructor. And the resource there would be USA Cycling. They actually have a certified skills instructor program. There's not a tremendous amount of them. I think I'm one of maybe 40 in the country. But if there's someone local to you, that's someone who understands and has been trained on how to break down riding skills and in a way that they can be built up. What I would suggest is practice, find an open parking lot, or even better, start in an open grassy field. And the reason for that is, one, grass is a little softer to fall on, but more importantly, the grass provides rolling resistance. So it actually, at lower speeds, you get a lot of balance out of it. And so learning how the bike reacts to your motions is really important. And what I see a lot of times, right over here, I'll do the impersonation.
He's prepared.
Right. So triathletes will be riding down the road going like this, right? Because are you riding a triathlon bike?
No, I'm on a road bike.
Even better. That's actually a good thing, and that's a recommendation.
Do you have another handle?
Yeah, probably. But what people go out and they buy a triathlon bike for their first bike, and then find out that, oh, this thing's a little bit different to control than any bike I've ever ridden before. But still, the point is, when you are going anything more than a few miles an hour, and I'm talking like 5-6 miles an hour, the bike works by leaning, not by steering. And so minor weight shifts will make will help you guide the bike. So you can demonstrate this to yourself. Just ride down the street, stop pedaling, and then just put your elbow out to the side, or even better, put your knee out to the side. And what you're doing is you're shifting weight over off center, and watch, the bike will just gently glide in that direction. And it's really important to learn that you can do these minor corrections to guide the bike without having to be herky-jerky about it. Yeah, I mean, it's there's sort of a lot to unpack in that, just because you're talking about operating a machine as you're traveling down the road. But I think the best thing you can do is get out there and practice safely. It's really important, and you owe it to yourself and also to the folks you're riding around. Even in a triathlon, you're around other people, and it's really important to be safe.
And you on the podcast, Patrick, we talked about on the podcast, especially with everyone riding indoors these days, especially in the spring races where people just come in. I mean, they train in the winter indoors almost exclusively. Mm-hmm. And we even mentioned Lionel Sanders, who's a top-notch, top-level triathlete, and all he does is pretty much ride indoors, except once in a blue moon. He got hit by a car 3 times, so he's like, I'm going indoors, which, that's good for him. But as you get out there, and it's almost sort of like when you're teaching your 16-year-old how to drive, you're not always just worried about them, but you have to be worried about everybody else out there as well. Mm-hmm. And nowadays you start doing those races, and you can almost tell which riders don't get a lot of time outdoors.
Yes, and actually that's an important piece too. That just reminded me of something. one thing that you can absolutely tell if someone has outdoor time or not is if they're comfortable eating and drinking while they're on the bike. You see that all the time. People will not be comfortable reaching down for a water bottle, or maybe you've got arm warmers on and you just need to pull the arm warmer down or up, and you're just not going to do it because you are not going to take your hands off the bars, right? Those kind of skills, those are the kind of things I'm saying, like, even without, like maybe you strike out and you don't have someone you can work with, although I'm sure there's someone you can work with local, maybe through a local tri-club even. But practicing, pick a safe place, pick a park with a big flat grassy area, ride around, take that bottle in and out. And maybe just start by take your hand off the bar, keep a straight line, put it back on, right? And build yourself up to it. If you have pockets, put your hand on your pocket. You don't even have to reach in and put your hand back on the bar, right? And just work yourself up to that. And then same thing with getting food in and out, getting bottles in and out.
That's what I can't do.
Yeah, work it incrementally in a safe environment.
No.
Yeah, and you've got time, right? I mean, your race is not for a little while. If it happens. But yeah, I mean, like literally, what I always recommend is, it's amazing what 5 minutes a day will do, over the course of the month, right? Or maybe if it's even every other day, right? Just take your bike, go ride around the yard, get comfortable on it, right? Because people will never do that. People will go out and they'll ride 50 miles outside and they'll go right back to their car or to their house and they're done. And they've never done any practice on the bike, right? At the end of that ride, go spin around a park for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
What we worked on the other day was just looking, like when you're going to pass somebody, just looking to the left to kind of seeing out there is when people look to the left, their bike goes left.
Absolutely, right. And that's another thing you can practice in, on a lawn, in a parking lot, right? And a parking lot's great because it's got lines. Just try and hold the line and turn your head, right? Hold the line and take a hand off.
Yeah. It's good to know that that's a possibility. I mean, but again, nothing that you're going to practice when you're on Zwift indoors. But anyway, let me just, if any of you guys have anything else, I know, Angela, I didn't get to say hi. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Angela.
Hi. Good to see you, Debbie.
Some people are so quiet and patient.
And Katy joined. But if you guys have any questions, I would love to hear them. I still have more here, but I think we're probably going to be done with the list. So if you guys have anything, let me know.
So I'm going to jump in. I like that idea. I don't like riding, so I have like a cheapy $200 Walmart bike, but because I don't plan on doing triathlons, and you can quote me on that. But I had to laugh so hard because I'm the one, the first time I tried reaching down for my water bottle, I about bit it. And then it is a lot lately, like my line is doing this. I kind of look like my puppy when she's walking. And so it is like trying to okay, I remember when I was a kid, I could balance without hands, and it's like, okay, let's relax a little bit. And so that was really good to know that I'm not the only idiot out there on a bike. I mean, I go on an abandoned trail for a reason, because it's flat-ish and I can practice those things like you said. I don't have flat grassy fields out here. Mm-hmm. So that's my flat, but at the same time, it's like, wow, that first time I went down for the bottle, it was like, okay, nope, we're going to not do this again. And
the key is just working to it incrementally, right? Even so, I mentioned that USAC skills instructor, breaking down, getting a bottle in and out, literally there's 3 steps in getting there, right? It's literally take your hand off the bars and then put it back on and get good with that, right? And just, it's baby steps to get yourself there. Don't feel like it's got to be all or nothing.
And and I kind of did that. I kind of okay, I'm going to go for it. And it's that first, okay, let me get one hand off. I mean, it's been beginning of April when I got my bike, and I hadn't ridden a bike in 20 years. Other than an occasional 2-mile bike ride down a hill with my fiance. But it was just this has been a whole new thing. It's now in the shop getting tuned up because, again, Walmart bike. But when it comes back, it's doing that and doing those things. Right now, I got a koozie holder on my cruiser. so don't got to worry about reaching over. I love it. So.
Yeah, I'm afraid of bikes too. Ask Scott. We went out the other day with Samantha, and she was giving me tricks. A 10-year-old giving me tricks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. Our neighbor's 6-year-old daughter was riding back and forth by my office today, no hands. Right?
Oh,
and
wow.
I bet most of us could do that as kids, but somewhere along the way, if we get away from riding, we stop doing that, and then adult fear sets in, right?
A 6-year-old can't ride a bike, so.
Well, Chris Froome, right? I mean, you know, Chris Froome, he won the Tour de France a bunch of times. He got into an accident because didn't he hit?
Well, he was doing that in a huge crosswind. Yeah. People were telling him not to do it moments before it happened.
Yeah. I used to ride my bike every day as a kid. I used to do the no hands all the time.
Yep.
Days, I wouldn't even think about taking both hands off the handlebars. No way.
I did it for 2 seconds.
On my rotator cuff.
Ooh.
Can I admit I don't know how to ride a bike?
I'm going to sign off. I'm sorry. I'm a very bad dietitian. I haven't eaten dinner yet. And
Allison, why don't you give us your information, how we can find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, A New Well Sports Nutrition. It's a new and then space well. And then Allison at anewwell.co. And it's anewwell.co is so not .com, it's .co. .com was taken, so I had to go with .co. But yeah, I mean, if you just Google Allison Knott dietitian, it should pop up. And I'm in the Facebook group.
Yay.
Yeah.
And I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter, and
We'll get you on the
I'm
podcast
unfortunately
again,
also
too.
on TikTok, and I have no idea what I'm doing on TikTok, but I'm
Oh my God.
Get off. Get off.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
I did it for 24 hours.
doing these like weird dance things, and they'll like point at stuff, but then it'll like pop up with words, and I'm like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
So actually,
Recipes.
wait, as you sign off, why don't we just go through the rest of you guys and just let us know how we can reach you, Patrick and Laura. Why don't you start, Patrick?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to sign up too. I haven't eaten dinner yet.
Okay, yeah, it's getting late anyway.
Okay, good. I feel better that I'm not the
Yeah,
only one.
you're good. Yeah, so easiest way to find us is speedscience.com. And then we're on social media at Speed Science Coaching.
Awesome. What about you, Laura? How can we find you?
Hi, you can't find me. Sonic Endurance. So Sonic Endurance, we've got .com, or our Facebook page is really active, or Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, and Facebook I'm Laura Ann, just because work and stuff, trying to keep that a little bit separate from personal. So Laura Ann, again, in the Facebook group, and today, if you needed to find me for this event, and Instagram, Laura Trains Try, lots of fun stuff, and all of Scott's podcasts that I've been on.
I'm officially following both of you now. So.
And if we didn't get to your question tonight, if you guys submitted a question and we didn't get to it and you want to have it answered, feel free to message any of these guys, and don't message me. I don't want to answer them. No, I'm kidding. You can message me.
Messaging you, Scott.
Message any of us, and we'll be happy to answer the questions. And I appreciate all of you guys spending time with us tonight. I mean, it's a little over a happy hour, maybe almost a happy 2 hours.
It was a very happy 2 hours. So
Yeah,
I had fun.
Does anyone else have anything else to add, or?